everybody. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning here. I hope it's worthwhile. I realize that this is not really a typical Master Gardener topic, and it seemed like there was a great need for this material. Sherida actually asked me to do this, and I did some research, and what I found online was pretty misleading. So I thought, okay, I might as well dive right in. I am not a toxicologist, although I do have some education in poisonous plants as part of our toxicology training. It was done up in the Northwest, so I've learned a lot about plants that are found in California because everything grows here. And so it may seem like we're covering some plants that are not likely, but you'd be surprised what you can buy online. You can buy anything. So what we're focusing on today are the most deadly poisonous plants. This is a really, really large topic in general, and plants that are known to cause death are my focus just because I think that's most important for you to know. There are too many of them to go into a lot of detail, so we're going to be going pretty fast. And this is not a complete list, so there are many, many poisonous plants that we're not going to talk about. So in case you happen to have missed the poll before I started, just type in the chat, reply to everybody, I guess. Type in the chat and let us know what your pets are. Be aware that there is research done on poisonous plants for mostly livestock. It's an egg-oriented endeavor, and there's really not that much research done for small animals. So this particular garden is really intriguing. I thought it might be interesting just to show you at Onick Castle in England. This particular property owner decided that we focus a lot on the benefits of plants, and yes, there are many, many benefits and health-giving properties that we enjoy because of plants, but there's also the darker side that people don't realize. And I think she wanted to really illustrate how dangerous plants can be. This particular garden has about 100 of the most deadly specimens found in Europe, and they are securely locked. And you have to set up an appointment and take a guided tour if you want to see them. So, is every plant toxic? Well, if you look at this snip from the ASPCA website, down here, there are over 1,000 listed. This website is a great visual resource for you. If you've never checked it out, you should do that. You can also type in and search for a list of non-toxic plants, say for dogs, and you'll get over 500 results. So keep that in your favorites, I would suggest. I also wanted to point out the apple on this page. We're going to talk about that later on in the presentation. So how do you know if you're buying a poisonous plant? Well, the label is not going to tell you. So you want to take the time to identify your plants before an ingestion occurs. Common names are not going to be as helpful here as you would hope. You want the full scientific name because there's a lot of confusion with common names. You can take good close-up pictures of all the plant parts, and you could take that or actually a specimen of the plant to a local nursery. They can be helpful. Facebook groups that are devoted to plant ID can be helpful. This particular group here is supposed to be, so far, it seems to be a good resource. I have not used it, but it's something for you to also keep in mind. And smartphone apps can be helpful too, although they're not always accurate. So plant poisons can vary quite a bit. And there are a lot of factors involved. A couple things for you to keep in mind. Cats are metabolically unique. They are unusually susceptible to several things that are not toxic to other species, and they're also resistant to some of the things that are very toxic to, say, dogs. Puppies, if you have a young puppy and you have anything at all that they can chew on, whether it's a plant or not, they should not be left unsupervised just because they get into trouble really fast. And people can also be poisoned by these plants. And there are several of them that we're going to cover that there are known instances of that happening. I can't stress this enough. You need to know where to go before an emergency happens and have a plan, because emergencies are never convenient. If you suspect a poisonous plant ingestion, it's always best to call first, because there are just so many variables that it's best to alert them that you're coming. And if they know you and your pet, they can have the medications all drawn up and ready to go. It just saves time. So one of the things I do want to mention too is that if it's a plant in this presentation, you don't want to waste a minute, literally. So you might even want to be calling while you're loading your pet in the car. Don't wait until your pet is sick if you suspect an ingestion. It's always better to do early decontamination and treatment, even if it turns out they didn't eat anything. It's better safe than sorry. Okay, so we're going to have a quick quiz. I don't know, Marcy, if you can pop that up on the screen.
Let's just keep going with the PowerPoint slide for right now.
Oh, okay, so this is I just want to get a feel for if you have any idea how many of these questions are true.
None of them.
They can answer on the chat.
Yeah, but I did hear there's somebody who's not muted out there who said none, and they're right. None of these are true. I've seen internet lists of poinsettias right up there with, say, sago palm, and they don't belong anywhere in the same category as some of the more poisonous plants. Okay, natural does not equal safe. Even though plants and botanical compounds in general can be really beneficial and we all enjoy them, many of them are not safe. And many plants have both good and bad ingredients. So this slide basically sums up the entire presentation. So if you decide to remove a poisonous plant, and I'm not saying that you necessarily need to do that, but if you do, only you are the one who knows what the risk is to your animals. You need to do it safely because you don't want to take an intact plant and make the situation more dangerous by leaving debris all over the ground. You want to wear a mask because you want to avoid any droplet inhalation or in your eyes, and you want to protect your skin. Some of these plants are so toxic that even a very small amount could be dangerous for you. So our first category of plants is going to be those that are encountered indoors. Allium species. These are notable because all forms are toxic. Dried garlic seems to be the most toxic, but raw, cooked, minced in jars, juice are all toxic. The toxic dose can accumulate over time. Cats are especially sensitive to this particular problem. And although most animal poisonings are from a single large ingestion, you can sometimes see it when, for instance, they're being fed a little bit of onion over time. So there used to be, hopefully there's not anymore, homemade diet recipes that were using onion powder or garlic powder as seasoning. So be aware of that. And these ingredients should be avoided for animals. The disorder itself is treatable, but it's best if caught early. So amaryllis, very beautiful plant. Large ingestions are needed for death to be a result, so that's not terribly likely, but things to be aware of here. I've got vomiting and or diarrhea abbreviated, V/D. You're going to see that a lot on these slides. A lot of these symptoms and signs overlap with non-poisoning issues, so they're very common. And just vomiting or diarrhea by itself doesn't automatically imply that poisoning has happened. Many plants, even non-toxic plants, can cause vomiting in certain individuals. Avocado. There are conflicting reports of avocado's toxicity online. It is not highly toxic to dogs. A dog would need to eat an incredible amount of avocado to have some GI upset. However, certain types of birds are very sensitive to avocado, especially budgies and canaries. Poultry less so, but they can also be affected. Cannabis. So this one is no doubt controversial. And it may be surprising to a lot of people, but dog deaths have occurred from cannabis. There is much misinformation online. It's largely anecdotal, and the research on cannabis safety and efficacy in dogs is still ongoing. So it's going to be a while before we really know how to use this product. And I think the potential is there and everybody's excited about the potential, but keep in mind that the market has really outpaced any rational science. So the effects of CBD and THC in dogs differ from those in people. Dogs' endogenous cannabinoid receptors are in different organ systems than they are in people. The lack of FDA oversight for this whole product area means that products have inaccurate labels with no consequence to the manufacturer. Products are often contaminated with pesticides, heavy metals, or solvents. And THC is often present despite label claims to the contrary. So toxic doses have been intentional or accidental. A lot of them actually involve human edibles that contain concentrates, which brings up a whole nother set of possible toxicities because chocolate is often involved. So CBD oil is the #1 cause of poisonings in dogs. It can mimic antifreeze ingestion, which just muddies the water quite a bit. It can also cause paradoxical aggression in some dogs. So despite the promise of all the potential benefits, we can't ethically recommend the use of cannabis until we know more, and research is actively being done. Croton could be an indoor or outdoor plant around here. It's a part of the euphorbia family. It has irritating sap. It's unclear which varieties are the most toxic, so it's safest to assume that all of them are. Hops. So this is my first slide with the yellow skull and crossbones symbol. This is on the slides that signify that they are the most dangerous of everything in this presentation. So this is the highest risk for toxicity if ingested. The advent of home brewing has exposed hops as a previously unknown toxin. So it's probably been at least 20 years that we've known about this problem. However, it might be treatable if it's caught early, but deaths have occurred despite early aggressive treatment. Keep in mind that spent hops are added to compost piles by home brewers and others who like to use them, kind of like the way people use coffee grounds. If you do that, make sure that your compost pile is not accessible to pets, because we know that dogs love compost. There are calming treats that are sold over the counter for pets that contain hops, and they are considered safe when used as directed, but I don't have any experience with those. Lilies and cats. Oh
Kelley,
my gosh.
Kelley, can I interrupt you really quick? We did get one question
Sure.
in the chat, and Dodonea visco is a hop bush. Does it pose the same risk as the hop plant that you just showed? Do you know?
I am not familiar with that plant.
Okay.
The only one that I know of for sure that's toxic is the Humulus lupulus plant. Doesn't mean that the other one isn't. I can't answer that, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So lilies and cats, one of the very worst plant poisons. I can't overstate how dangerous this is if you have a cat. Even a small amount of pollen, say your cat rubs up against the anthers on an Easter lily and then grooms the pollen off of its fur, that's enough to cause poisoning. A small amount of water from a vase that contained a lily is enough to cause poisoning. So if you have cats, it's recommended that you don't even bring these plants into your house. We are only talking here about Lilium and Hemerocallis or daylily species. Here are some Lilium hybrids that are also equally toxic to cats, so keep these in mind. Anything that has Lilium or Hemerocallis in the genus, you want to avoid. Signs of exposure can vary from mild to more severe with a 0 to 12-hour onset. If you suspect lily exposure, don't wait. Early intervention is the key, with a survival rate that's reported of about 90%. So that's the good news here. This poster actually is on the website of Pet Poison Helpline. They do have some interesting resources that you might want to take a look at. Other toxic lilies. Now these are not Lilium species. They are very toxic, but they also involve humans and dogs as well. So clockwise from top left, we have autumn crocus, glory lily, kaffir lily, lily of the valley, and checkered lily.
Kelley,
Yeah.
the other lilies, the ones that you did before that are so toxic to cats, are they also toxic to dogs?
No,
Okay. But these are.
these are, yes. The toxin in Lilium species for cats, we don't understand. It hasn't even been isolated or described. These lilies have a number of different toxins that are well understood. So, I've kind of summed it up briefly on this slide, but yeah, they're very toxic as well. Luckily, dogs aren't in the habit of eating a lot of plant material. It's not as common as, say, xylitol or chocolate or rat bait or, slug bait ingestions. But when they happen, it can be very bad. So raisins, grapes, and Xanthi-currants, which are a small grape, also a very severe toxin. The toxin here is also not understood, but it's thought to be idiosyncratic, which means that it's not always present. You have to assume that it is, however. Vomiting seems to be an almost universal sign of exposure here. So say a dog eats a handful of grapes and then throws them up a little bit later. If you find this has happened, you really shouldn't assume that the risk is gone and that the stomach has been emptied. That's actually a mistake. I mean, studies show that dogs don't vomit 100% of what's in their stomach. So it's really important to seek veterinary care as soon as possible in an ingestion of this type. And then there are also some products on the market. There's a grape juice and blueberry juice type of supplement for dogs, which is considered to be safe as far as I know. I haven't come across any mishaps because of it, but that's really all I can tell you.
Kelley, we had a lot of interest in the lilies, and
Okay.
a couple of the questions have to do with, is the toxicity an issue with all parts of the plants?
All parts of the plant.
Thank you.
Let's back up here. Yeah, all plant parts are toxic, which means everything: nectar, pollen, stem, root. So it's really hard to predict when poisoning is going to happen with a plant like this. So because it's so devastating, it's better safe than sorry, and just avoid these.
Someone has asked about their rabbits loving raisins.
Well, I don't know of any. That's a good question. I don't know of issues with rabbits, but I would avoid them just because we don't know what the toxin is. And, your rabbit should really be eating greens anyway and not fruits, just because you've got so many potential GI issues with rabbits. But yeah, I can't give you anything specific. I mean, look, there's even ferrets have been poisoned by grapes. It's best to be safe and avoid it. Okay, so do we have any other questions about the indoor plant toxins, or shall we keep going?
I think we've seen most of the questions. One person says they fed grapes and raisins to their rabbit and they were okay. So,
well, yeah. So my mom, when she was a kid, they fed their cat raisins all the time, and he was fine. But like I say, it's an idiosyncratic toxin, and you never know when it's going to be there.
right. And one other person did do some research and came up with the hop plant. The hop bush was a different family. I haven't double checked that, but that was a different plant family.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so now we are switching gears to outdoor plants, whether they be in landscapes or in wild areas. And some of these are fairly exotic sounding, but they do exist in California. And if you happen to know of any of these plants, please reply in the chat and let us know where it is, because I think it will help us. So Acacanthera is one of several ancient arrow poisonings. It's actually similar to Melianthus or honeybush, which is a less likely toxic plant, but I'm sure, and that's what this is down here, honeybush. I'm sure that these have got to be out there somewhere. Aconitum is the source of aconite, which is another arrow poison. It's in the family Ranunculaceae, which also includes buttercups, if that's helpful. All of the plants in this family are toxic to some degree. So I've got two maps here. The California map shows the distribution of the native A. columbianum. And then this map shows, because it's brown, that tells you that we're talking native and introduced species. So pretty much nationwide. Another thing to keep in mind, anything that has Bane in its name, you should probably avoid. And we've got a few of them here today in this presentation. Azaleas and rhododendrons. So these are toxic to many species, including people and reptiles. Grazing animals are the most likely to be poisoned by these. There is a phenomenon called mad honey that's related to honeybees foraging extensively on either azalea or rhododendron, and then the toxins tend to appear in the honey. And people that eat this honey can develop neurologic issues. It's said to be common in the Black Sea region. I should mention that camellias are not toxic, even though they're lumped in with similar habitat needs to azalea and rhododendron. Baptisia, or blue wild indigo, is a popular outdoor plant that's drought tolerant, needs no fertilizer or pest control. It's commonly found, I did locate it on a local big box store's website, so it's one of those plants that you can buy and order no matter where you live. Luckily, it's unlikely to be eaten in pasture lands unless good forage is sparse. The nightshades. So nightshades seem to be overrepresented in this poisonous plant category. So I've got a few things to point out on this slide. First of all, there's a wide diversity of toxins in this group of plants. There are some very powerful drugs that have been isolated from these plants. But that doesn't mean that it's wise to try to cultivate them and treat yourself with the plant extract. That's incredibly dangerous. The group itself, this top is deadly nightshade. And we have a complex of really closely related species that are difficult to identify with certainty. So there's a black nightshade in California that looks just like this, except it has white blooms and black berries. I didn't get a picture of that one. We have black henbane down below, which is not found in California, but it's found in all the surrounding states. Deadly nightshade has showed up in my backyard a couple times over the last 20 years. We have this map is, the blue shows that it's an introduced species. So this is Atropa belladonna, widespread throughout California.
Kelley?
Yes.
Before you go on, somebody asked a question, and I think it's a good one to know just in general. They said, if you have edible landscaping, which includes flowering plants like the Baptisia or other ones, near the edibles, would that impact the edibles?
No, it should not.
Okay, thank you.
So we have let's see, where was I? Oh, yes, 1 to 2 berries from deadly nightshade is said to be lethal to a child. The black nightshade that I mentioned a little bit ago that looks like this plant is one of the worst weeds in California. It's generally herbicide resistant and it tends to gum up harvesting equipment. So I also wanted to point out that there have been deaths in pigs and cattle when they were grazing on foliage from tomato crops. Black locust, the bark is the most toxic part of this plant and horses are the most likely to be poisoned. There are several species of black locust, but the pseudoacacia is the one to be concerned about. And then the green on this map denotes that it's a native species and it has a very extensive range. Squill or bluebells is a spring blooming bulb, which apparently has a really large bulb. And I found the taxonomy really confusing. There are about 90 species that are said to be in this same group. The flower colors vary from blue to white to lavender to pink. And several suspected cases of poisoning have been described, even though it's a really strong emetic, which makes ingesting a lethal dose not as likely, but it apparently can still happen. Okay, blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. This is our first non-plant, but it's close enough because these are bacteria that have chloroplasts and are able to photosynthesize. This is a very bad group of toxins. It's poisonous to all vertebrates, including birds, fish, reptiles. I'm sure you've all heard of blue-green algae, and with good reason. There are about 2,000 species of blue-green algae, and not that many produce toxins. Somewhere between 40 and 100 of the species actually produce toxins, and there's a huge variety of toxins that this group is responsible for. I do want you to be aware that poisonings have happened with over-the-counter blue-green algae supplements. So the thing to keep in mind with blue-green algae is that the appearance of the water is not a guide. That's probably the most important thing for you to realize, that if the water's clear, sometimes toxin can still be there. Milder winter temperatures mean that the risk is often present year-round. So dogs that get exposed to blue-green algae can show signs within 5 to 20 minutes, up to a few hours later, depending on which toxins are involved. Unfortunately, many dogs die before treatment can be started. But there have been some cases treated successfully when the timing and everything else worked out perfectly. So this link here will take you to the state's information site on harmful algal blooms. That's what the HABs part denotes. And it's actually really helpful. So this map is from, I think I looked this up on the 26th of February, so it was very recent. And then you can search by county. And as you can see, there are already 3 danger alerts in Alameda County as of February 19th. And that means you have to stay out of the water. Okay, so boxwood. This, like many of the, well, most of the plants in this presentation, not a good landscaping choice around horse arenas or enclosures. Large ingestions of boxwood would be needed by a dog to cause a problem. So it's generally not fatal in dogs, but in a horse, 1.5 pounds can be fatal. Brugmansia, another beautiful and highly poisonous nightshade. This one affects animals and people. It's said that children should not even handle this plant. They seem to be very susceptible and can develop signs like blurry vision and other neurologic issues just from touching it. This one is slightly less toxic than Datura, which is coming up shortly. Another angel's trumpet, common named plant. But the toxin in this one is more evenly distributed. Brunfelsia, this one is a nasty toxicity, but it can be successfully treated. It's also known as morning, noon, and night, or kiss me quick. It has a limited range due to frost tenderness. It also has yellow and pink variations. The colors fade to white over about 3 days, and this one can reach about 10 feet tall when planted in the ground. It's a fairly uncommon poisoning, but I actually found several clinical cases in the Bay Area in California in dogs. The toxins are poorly understood, but they seem to be quickly absorbed and last a long time. Again, it can be treated if caught early enough. So for heather, this one's on UCCE's list of plants that cause death, but I couldn't find any cases. I just thought I should mention it. Okay, this is another bad one. In fact, this is a terrible, terrible plant, although it's attractive. So, precatory beans, this is Abris precatorius up top. It has these little red and black seeds that are used to make jewelry and rosaries. At least it has been in the past, and not in this country, but in other places around the world. You may see these. Castor bean is the source of castor oil, which is non-toxic. It's also the source of castor bean cake or pumice, which is used in some organic fertilizers, and it's highly toxic. So ricin, which is the toxin here, is most potent in the seeds. The seeds have to be chewed for the toxin to be released. The seeds are actually pretty, and they're up to about 1/2 inch in size, and they all have this little fleshy caruncle at one end. So that might be helpful to know that. The toxin itself is a category B bioterrorism agent that causes multi-organ failure. It's 6,000 times the toxicity of cyanide. And castor oil does not contain the water-soluble toxin. So I've got several shots here of the plant itself. There's actually one of these not too far from my house. It's an attractive plant. It can get to 10 feet tall in 1 year and up to 40 feet tall at maturity. Sometimes the leaves are not reddish, but oftentimes they are. And then the fruiting structures here show that the seed pods contain 3 seeds that are forcibly ejected when they are ripe.
Kelley,
Yeah.
if those seeds got ejected and then they got crushed by something, and then they got rained on, would that toxin be in that water?
You'd have to assume that it was. since it's water soluble, and this one is incredibly potent.
Okay, somebody asked why
So-
it would be approved for use in a fertilizer with this high level of toxin. That is a
Well,
good question.
That's a great question, and I cannot answer that. I did find, let's see, there's an 85% mortality rate associated with ingestion of castor bean cake as fertilizers, which presumably, dogs will eat fertilizer, and they're not the only species that will. So, yeah, I don't even know, I don't understand why poisonous plants aren't labeled at the nursery, but they're not.
Because you wouldn't sell as many of them.
Well, that's true. And then, it's a fine line too. Lots of plants are slightly toxic, but don't tend to cause any problems. And where would you differentiate the degree of toxicity? Plus, there are all those other plant factors that are involved, how it's grown, altitude, climate, all those things can help determine the toxin content. So, okay, cestrum or jessamine. Moving on. There are about 200 species of cestrum, and they are all toxic. This is another nightshade. The berries are said to stain your skin purple. Whether that's helpful or not, I'm not sure. A fairly large amount of this one needs to be ingested to cause illness or death. But any of these plants that have recently been sprayed with an herbicide and are wilting, their palatability is increased and they are still highly toxic. So comfrey is poisonous. This is a pyrrolizidine alkaloid containing plant, and there are probably about, I think I read 6,000 plants known to contain pyrrolizidine alkaloids. So the content is going to vary, but pyrrolizidine alkaloids destroy liver cells and cause liver cirrhosis. It's also known as bone knit or knit bone. It's had many internal and external medicinal uses since antiquity. The toxin is cumulative. And it's also been touted as a compost additive online. So if you choose to do this, you should be cautious.
Kelley, while
yeah.
we're on the herbs, somebody asked, is borage toxic?
Borage also contains pyrrolizidine alkaloids. It's not recommended that borage be taken internally. It's one of those things. So you can possibly get by with a very small dose of these things with no ill effects. But when you start taking something like that over a period of time, it gets a lot more risky. I don't know how the levels of toxin would compare between this plant and borage. I just know that borage is one of the plants that contains this toxin as well. Borage is actually supposed to only be used for external applications. Same thing with comfrey. As you can see, it was banned for internal use. I don't know why it took them that long to do it, but it has been banned for internal use. So cycads or sago palms, this is actually one of the very worst. I mean, if I could label something as a 10-star emergency, this would probably be it. So plant-wise, these are interesting plants. They're actually the dinosaur of plants. They've been around for millions of years. They can live over 1,000 years, and they're very slow growing and slow maturing. They are used equally in landscapes and as potted plants and bonsai. They're dioecious with male and female plants. So this shot here at the bottom is a female fruiting structure that's about the size of a basketball. And the seeds turn orange when they're mature, which makes them attractive to birds. And birds are also poisoned by this plant. Dogs will definitely eat the seeds if they are available. And this is a really bad liver toxin. So 1 or 2 seeds can kill a dog. Because the plant is fairly slow growing, it doesn't get trimmed very often, which is probably good. These plants are all over my neighborhood. And I am not aware of any dogs being poisoned, but the possibility certainly exists. Especially with, this is one that if you're trimming or pruning, you need to be really careful with how you handle the plant parts. You should double bag them and put them in the trash. Don't put them in the yard waste. Wear protection. You know, we just don't want to risk any secondary inadvertent exposure here. And this is a male plant. The fact that it can take many decades to mature is probably why we don't see as many poisonings of this as we could otherwise. But when they occur, they're real bad. Early treatment can, you know, the survival rate isn't outstanding, but some dogs do survive, especially when the people are on it right away.
Kelley, before you go on, there's a question that they asked it about borage, but it probably applies to other plants too. They were wondering about bees and their honey they make if they get their nectar from these plants. Is that something that people need to be concerned about or not?
I don't know the answer to that one either. I don't know if pyrrolizidine alkaloids appear in the pollen or the nectar.
My guess, just having had bees at one time, my guess, not something I know, is that the percentage would be very, very, very small.
Well, yeah, that's probably true. If, you know, the bees would have to forage on it extensively, and I don't know how likely that is.
You'd have to have a whole field of borage.
Yeah, right. Which probably doesn't happen in California.
No.
So cyclamen, this one's really only an issue if you have a large amount of this plant and there's a large ingestion. Daphne, this one's notable for causing blisters on the lips and inside the mouth. You can also see drooling, nausea, abdominal pain, stomach upset. I don't know how commonly this one's ingested, but it's not an uncommon plant, so I would definitely be careful of it. Again, none of these plants should be used in landscaping around animal facilities.
Mm.
So Datura, which is the other angel's trumpet that I mentioned a while back, this one's found pretty much everywhere, and I've seen it in South Stockton. Tends to show up in the newspaper or on Facebook pages occasionally, people wanting to know, what is this plant? Well, you know, you can look at it and think, man, it kind of looks poisonous. At least to me it does. It's a belladonna-like toxin. It likes disturbed soil, but it can show up pretty much anywhere. And it's got that very striking nightshade appearance. People have intentionally ingested or smoked this one and died as a result, presumably because it's hallucinogenic. I don't know if it was worth it, but anyway, the seed pod gives rise to one of the common names, which is the thorn apple.
Somebody had a question about the sago palm, asking if handling it can pass the toxin.
You do need to be careful handling it. So if you're handling any parts of that plant, I would wear gloves, I would wear long sleeves, long pants, and make sure that everything goes in the wash right away. You can't be too careful with that one.
Okay, thank you.
So death camas or zygodinus, this is a widespread native that tends to like dry hillsides or meadows. So it's often, believe it or not, this is a human toxin and grazing livestock. People, I guess, confuse it with wild onion. About 2% body weight ingestion can be fatal. So that means 2 pounds for a 1,000-pound cow. And it tends to grow often alongside delphinium. So you end up with a dual toxicity, at least if you're a grazing animal. If you are a person who forages wild plants, you need to know what you're doing, so be careful. Dicentra or bleeding heart, this one can be pretty serious, but luckily it needs a high dose. So if you just remove the animal from the plant, it tends to be self-limiting. Flower bulbs, especially narcissus. So these are not highly toxic, but death has occurred, usually with very large ingestions of bulbs. The rest of the plant also has some toxin, but I'm not aware of any deaths with ingestion of the stems, leaves, or flowers with these plants. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened, I just haven't come across it. So the typical exposure for a dog is when they dig up a bed of freshly planted bulbs or when they get into an old bag of bulbs. And sometimes bulbs can be moldy, which just introduces another set of toxins into the equation. So deaths are uncommon, but they have happened. So this is another type of jasmine. The Gelsemium species is actually a very toxic plant. Early treatment can be successful, although it may take a few days to treat. But fatalities are not that rare, especially goats. And goats are a little more likely to browse on leaves than other ruminants. So if you have goats, you got to watch them. But of course, you probably already know that. This plant is reportedly found in some homeopathic remedies. So you should read labels carefully, even though homeopathy, the premise is that the substance is so diluted that it can't be toxic. While that's essentially true, you have to trust that the manufacturer has good quality control and that the product meets the label specifications. There's really no way to know that. So just be aware. Heliotrope, this is another pyrrolizidine alkaloid containing plant. There haven't been any reported cases in the United States yet. There probably will be. So far, most have been reported in Australia. Well, we're going to take a little time to spend with poison and water hemlock because these are very important plants to know. So this is water hemlock on the left. Poison hemlock, top right. They look very similar, but these are two different plants with different neurologically active toxins. So they are often confused by people that are foraging for edible plants, and scores of human deaths have occurred from these plants. Water hemlock on the left is actually multiple closely related species. This one likes wet feet, so you're going to find it along the shores of streams or in swampy areas. The lowest inch of the stem is quite thickened in this plant. It's also said to be the most violently convulsive toxin in this part of the world. So a walnut-sized piece of root can kill a cow. Poison hemlock, which is taller, this one is the plant that killed Socrates, and there's only one species here. This one is Conium maculatum. It can get to be about 10 feet tall, and you can see this one almost anywhere. I came across a comment on the UC Weed Science blog from a family that said, we think this is what killed our cat. So if you come across this plant and you think that's what it is and you want to remove it, you need to use all the precautions that we've talked about. This one can cause convulsions within 15 to 60 minutes. Poison hemlock takes a little bit longer. So for the ID, just some basic things for you to be aware of, although I don't think you're going to be cutting these plants down the middle. Water hemlock here on the left has, the stem is hollow in the internodal areas. I mentioned the thickened lower portion. The root has compressed hollow internodes, and it usually contains several tubers, sort of like a dahlia tuber, although very young roots can be solid. Poison hemlock, which is more likely to be along roadsides and in ditches, irrigated pastures, things like that, has a spotted hairless stem that's also hollow. These are both biennials, but this is what the first year rosette looks like for poison hemlock, and it's toxic at this stage. And people confuse it with wild artichoke and wild parsley. The second year growth, when you get flowering, like I said, can be up to 10 feet tall. And there's one of these plants that I see every time I drive north near Reading. It's in a nice pasture near a barn. And I keep thinking, wow, I'd expect somebody to take that plant out. But these are both bitter. They're not going to be sought out by livestock unless there's nothing else to eat. And the other thing about water hemlock to be aware of is that just cattle walking down to the stream and trampling on the roots that are at the riverbank release enough toxin that it can kill them. Okay, so lantana is a very common plant around here. Early on, poisonings, you can see photosensitivity, which is sores and blisters on the lighter colored parts of the face where sun exposure is the greatest. You can get acute poisonings in dogs if they ingest a lot of unripe berries, but the ripe berries are supposed to be non-toxic. Larkspur, another plant in the Ranunculaceae family. There are many toxic species of this plant all across the western United States. It's going to be more common in the high plains, but I dare say it shows up in landscapes because it's so pretty. It's generally going to be most toxic in the spring. Or most likely ingested in the spring, before other grasses have started to grow. And herbicide use on this plant increases the palatability and does not reduce how poisonous it is. Lathyrus. So this is a very old human neurologic condition that still exists in parts of India. The toxins can affect nervous tissue and collagen, and it results in a permanent disability. Horses are actually highly susceptible. It causes them to develop a string halt-like gait, among other issues. And we think that mostly it's due to sweet peas, vetch, and garbanzo beans, or chickpeas. So lobelia is going to be a concern if you buy an herbal supplement or tea. The plant itself is unlikely. It's hard for a dog to eat enough to cause toxicity, but poisonings have happened with the herbal supplements and the teas. The overdose has been known to cause death. So loquats have toxic seeds, and a large amount of seeds can cause death. This is a cyanide generating compound. The seeds must be chewed. I did find a case where a couple of zoo otters died after hoarding and preferentially eating loquat seeds from a tree that was hanging over their enclosure.
Kelley, before you go on, let's see, we had a question about the sweet pea and chickpeas. Are they both the plants are toxic?
Yes, but we're talking overconsumption here, okay?
And then we had another one. I was waiting for the right place to ask you, but I might as well ask it now. In pruning apricot and apple trees, will the bark be toxic? The person's dog loves to carry and chew the cuttings.
We actually will get to that.
Okay. I thought it was
For a dog with those species, the only real potential concern would be apricot pits, but we'll get to that.
Okay, thank you.
So lupin, there are over 100 species of lupin. We know that these 3 are toxic. We don't know which others are toxic. So I think it's safest to assume they all are. The toxicity varies with geography and altitude. And one thing to note about lupin is sometimes it's cut along with grasses and fed as fodder. And when it's cut, it can support the growth of a toxic mold. Amelia or China berry is potentially serious in dogs. It can be fatal if enough berries are eaten. This tree apparently is found on college campuses and in some college arboretums. So it's not one that I'm familiar with. Mistletoe. So American mistletoe or phorhodendron has a very low chance of toxicity. Mostly it's going to be gastrointestinal upset. Very large ingestions can cause heart arrhythmias, but I haven't read of any deaths with that one. Viscum album, which is European mistletoe, is found throughout California, and this one is more toxic. It's also found in some herbal medicine preparations, especially multiple herbal ingredients. It's got anti-tumor effects and some other things that people are interested in. It's probably safest to avoid this just because, for one thing, multiple ingredient herbal medicine preps are usually not ideal. They are too general to be specific enough for an individual patient. And dosing criteria is hard to meet when you're using something like that. Raw mistletoe is potentially dangerous. And it's possible that someday they will be using the processed herbal extract when more research has been done. Kalmia latifolia, or mountain laurel. This one actually takes a pretty low dose to kill. And even though it's native to the eastern United States, I've seen it on a local big box store's website. It has similar habitat and toxins to azalea. And I came across a case of a dog who ate enough of this that he actually had to have surgery to remove the plant parts from his stomach. He wasn't responding to treatment until they went in and removed whatever parts of the plant he had eaten, and he did recover. Okay, so this is our second non-plant. This one is a really important thing for you to be aware of. So Amanita phalloides is the one that we're mostly concerned with here. It causes 90% of the mushroom deaths in the United States. Also known as the death cap. It's a very non-remarkable appearing fungus. Its range is thought to be increasing, and it's apparently found throughout the Bay Area year-round. Often it's near the base of an oak tree, but it can be anywhere. Things to keep in mind for mushroom ingestions. 1/2 of an Amanita mushroom can kill an adult person. This, unfortunately, is a heartbreaking diagnosis. It's often made too late when it comes to pets and sometimes to people. Any dog who eats a mushroom should be taken to a veterinarian immediately, and you should assume it was poisonous. You should not touch these mushrooms. You should not let your dog sniff or touch, let alone eat one. And do not be misled by amateur mushroom foragers. The identifying characteristics here are not always present, especially this structure up here. There's also, this link is to, this is a volunteer mushroom ID group that some of you might be interested in. There are lots and lots and lots of mushroom toxins. And there are lots of toxic species of mushrooms. And I wouldn't even begin to try to guess how to identify any of these mushrooms. So I just try to avoid all of them. So Myoporum is a tree that's found in coastal woodlands and in the Bay Area. I would think that ingestions are certainly possible, although I couldn't find any confirmed cases. Nicotiana. So this is actually a potentially useful but toxic nightshade family member. It's used in pH farming because it's so easy to cultivate. There are many alkaloids in tobacco, with nicotine just being the most widely known. Poisoning can take several hours to occur when the plant is ingested because the toxins leach slowly in the gut. But they are absorbed from the mouth very quickly. Birds are highly susceptible. They can show signs within 15 to 45 minutes, whether it's inhaled or ingested. And human use of tobacco products is our biggest concern here as far as pet exposures, including vaping supplies and spent e-cartridges. They are probably the greatest exposure risk to pets. And keep in mind that third-hand smoke is also dangerous to pets and small children. Third-hand smoke are the particles that cling to everything in a smoker's environment. Even if they never smoke inside the house, those particles are going to be everywhere that they touch. And those are certainly, cats especially seem to be sensitive to that. So oleander and other cardiac glycosides. Oleander is one of, if not the most toxic plant that is commonly seen in the Central Valley. As little as 1 or 2 leaves is said to cause a heart attack. A few leaves sitting in a puddle of water and then having a dog or some other critter come along and lap up that water can cause poisoning. There have been fatalities reported in dogs, horses, and cattle. And I suspect there are other cases that go unreported. It is a bitter plant, so it isn't commonly eaten, but then again, you just never know. Successful treatment has occurred, but it can be costly. So from top clockwise, we have dogbane, foxglove or digitalis, and kalanchoe. So poisonings due to kalanchoe are actually real common in Africa and Australia where it grows wild. And I was not able to find specific information on which varieties may or may not be toxic. So I just assume that they all are. Sorry, I can't be more definite than that. More cardiac glycoside plants, showy milkweed, yellow oleander, which is a different species than oleander, which is this one here, and then Star of Bethlehem. Mayapple, which apparently this is a not uncommon human poison because people confuse this with mandrake. So I've got no feel for that because I'm not sure how well this plant does in our part of the world. But like I say, anything can grow in parts of California, so be careful. Privet, there are over 50 species of privet. The one that we're most concerned about is the japonicum, and that's a real common plant in my area. The leaves, berries, trimmings are all poisonous. And the reason it's important to know which plant parts are poisonous is because if your dog is prone to chewing on twigs, well, you know, if you have some of these outside and you're pruning, you should be really careful with them. This one tends to be worse in large animals than dogs and cats, like a lot of plant ingestions. Herbivores have a much differently designed gastrointestinal tract. And so it would be difficult for a dog to eat enough, but they can certainly get sick with stomach upset and diarrhea. So the prunus and cyanide species, there's a lot going on these slides, and I apologize. I wanted to at least put these things in an easy to find location. But these are literally everywhere. And it's really difficult for a dog to eat enough of any of these plants to have a problem, with the exception of apricot pits, moist, freshly cut leaves, especially chokecherry and trees like that. And hydrangea is one of those exceptions for dogs. They can get fairly severe GI upset from eating hydrangea. So the apple I wanted to mention, the seeds are very much a concern for really tiny dogs. So, you know, a teacup poodle, something that's super tiny. One apple seed could be serious. So if you have a really tiny dog, be careful of that. I've got the most toxic prunus species for horses shown here. We have, clockwise from top left, English laurel, chokecherry, wild black cherry. And then this one, I don't have a feel for how common it is in California, but it's native to the cloud forests of Mexico around 1,200 feet elevation. So it's probably not going to do too well in the Central Valley. Brawolfia, this is a tropical plant that's native to the Indian subcontinent. And it's used actually to treat hypertension and as a sedative. Poisonings in dogs have occurred when they have ingested the supplements. I did find a case of a dog that recovered after 4 days of hospitalization. I understand that a lot of people feel like an herbal extract is the way that they want to treat something, but these are like drugs. And they basically are drugs. They're just less pure. And so the side effect potential could be more varied. For instance, this drug also can deplete neurotransmitters besides causing sedation and low blood pressure. Vinca. This is a common low maintenance ground cover that is attractive but potentially deadly. It's got numerous flower colors as well as variegated varieties. It is the source of several toxic alkaloids and at least 4 anti-cancer drugs. Yellow star thistle. So this is another really heartbreaking toxin. This is a particularly noxious weed that has infested over 15 million acres in California. And because it's an annual, it's susceptible to properly timed herbicide use and IPM methods. It's also going to be essential for homeowner contribution to help stop the spread. The toxin is cumulative and it destroys a particular nucleus in the brain of a horse over time and makes it so that they cannot eat. So this is also a high concern plant. Yew is very poisonous, and the seeds are the most toxic, but all parts are poisonous. So even chewing on twigs can kill a dog. There are multiple species of Taxus, and they're all toxic. And unfortunately, death is often the first sign of exposure. There have been cases reported in many species of animals, and yew extracts are also contained in some herbal preparations, which are not recommended. Yew is also the source of Taxol, which is an anti-cancer drug. So that's the end of the most deadly poisonous plant slides. There are some things that I want to reiterate. Do not feed landscape trimmings to livestock, and choose your landscape plants carefully. If you have a dog who's very adventurous and thinks that everything's edible, it's probably best to be proactive if you've got some of these especially highly toxic plants. And keep in mind that there's a whole bunch of other plants out there that haven't been known to cause death, but they can certainly make your dog plenty sick. And we just don't have time to go into those. As part of the resources that we're sending out, there's a list of those common houseplants that contain both soluble and insoluble oxalates. So that's something you might want to take a look at. But in general, do your due diligence, check out your plants and identify everything you can. And before you choose new plants, do a little research and find out if they're toxic.
We have one question on the chat right now that we haven't answered. It was their neighbor's oleander hangs over their vegetable garden over the fence. And the question is, if the leaves drop on the space where the vegetables are, do they need to worry about that?
I don't think so. I would try to keep the oleander leaves picked up though, just because the leaf would probably need to be ingested. As far as, is it going to contaminate the soil and then be picked up by your vegetable plants? I really doubt that.
Okay, we have some other questions which I will run down, try to get through quickly. And I do know that anything that hangs over a fence, if it's hanging over the fence, you can cut what's on your part of the fence.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for the great presentation. And then let's see, the next one is, my dog seeks out flowering verbena leaves. Bad?
So verbena is not one that I came across in my research, so I'd have to say I don't know. But you can always Google these, and you may be able to find some information that's helpful to you. Just
okay.
try to go toward websites that are research supported, like a university's website, or the CSU, the Colorado State University Veterinary Teaching Hospital website has a nice poisonous plants visual resource. And check out the ASPCA website as well.
A couple more. They had a quick question of, we should not mulch or chip these things as well, correct?
I would not.
Okay. And then this one, I think that you can reassure this person. You said, fabulous presentation. I'm not sure I can garden anymore, LOL. But all of this is most informative. Appreciate your time and effort. So she did put the LOL, but
well, I suppose that's the downside to going over information like this. I'm not trying to scare people. I'm not trying to make anybody panic, but I think that knowledge is really important here.
I think it is too, Kelley. And I would like to say that after viewing your presentation twice, I'm aware that I have a number of the plants on your list are in my garden, and I have my animals that I care about. What it means is that I need to pay attention to my animals and what they're doing and be proactive on that. Fortunately, my little dog is not much of a chewer, so I don't have to worry too much about that. But I think that's the focus, is you need to know what you're putting in your yard and what to do about it.
Yeah, and your pets, because I've had Nandina, I've had deadly nightshade, although I got rid of that right away. I know Sherida used to have oleander on her property. There's sago palms all over my neighborhood, although I wouldn't have one of those. And I'm not aware of any dogs succumbing because of where the plants are and how the dogs are monitored and contained, presumably. They don't run loose.
I see several questions about the recording, and I know that it will not happen immediately because it takes time to get it prepared. And I believe that Marcy will be sending out the link for that when it's prepared.
Yeah,
Can I add something for you to elaborate on?
sure.
About questions that people may have regarding other plants. And it's similar to that email that I sent you with the question somebody sent in about their plants and are they toxic to pets? And can you maybe just elaborate, while master gardeners are here, who they really should reach out to and contact with more specific questions?
Yeah, so there's over 1,000 plants that we potentially have to worry about with our pets. Even though many of them are not going to kill your pet, they could certainly make them sick enough to have to go in and be treated or maybe even hospitalized. And we want to avoid that. So your best bet is to ask your veterinarian. That's your number one resource. They know your pet. I don't know your pet. I can't give specific advice. I did want to point out there's a relatively new toxic plants book, but it's really expensive. But if your library has it, or if you're lucky enough to find it for resale, that would probably be a good resource to have. And then this is a really old, long out of print book, but it's kind of the gold standard. It's got a lot of great detailed information on ID and the finer points of taxonomy and all the toxins involved if you're really kind of a geek. I got it for $10 on thrift books. When I was in school, this was too expensive for me to buy. So there aren't any other really good sources of where all this information is found in one place. But I would say that the ASPCA website is probably your best place to start.
There's one question I don't think we answered. Somebody asked about passion flower.
Passion flower. I am not aware of that one.
I made passion flower jelly. I made passion fruit jelly this year. It was good.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that one. That's something you'd have to check out on your own.
Okay. I think we have covered all the questions. So, and lots of thank yous and lots of kudos for a great presentation, but I think I've covered all the questions. So.
Kelley, thank you. That was such a great amount of information. And I know that we all probably feel a little bit overwhelmed at the moment with all of this great information. And just know that within the week, it is Marcy's and my intent to have this up on our websites. We'll have it both in the San Joaquin Master Gardener as well as the Humboldt and Del Norte websites. And we will be sending out those links to let you know that they are up, as well as the links for the resources that Kelley has mentioned. So it was a real pleasure, to bring this presentation to everyone today. And I have a big thank you for attending today. And a huge thank you to Kelley for putting in all of this research and putting together this information. And Marcy, thank you for allowing me to co-host this with you. It was a great time, and I really appreciate it.
I appreciate everybody that came and registered for the class, and look forward to getting all this information. I see lots of people wanting to share this information with friends and family and neighbors. So we will work on getting this video out ASAP so that you can watch it again or share it with friends and family.
Well, good. That's as good as we can hope for, right?
Perfect. All right. We hope that everybody has a wonderful day. Enjoy if you're in an area that has sunshine like we have here in San Joaquin County. Hopefully you'll be able to go outside and get some gardening done, and have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you for coming, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.